London, late October 1842. The season had ended weeks ago, but the streets of Mayfair remained crowded with those who had nowhere better to be. Clara Ashford walked among them, head high despite the weight pressing on her chest. 3 months since her family had cast her out. 3 months since her name became synonymous with scandal. 3 months working as companion to Mrs. Beatrice Winters, a widow whose cruelty was matched only by her demanding nature. The afternoon was cold, grey clouds promising rain. Clara pulled her worn cloak tighter and kept her eyes forward. She had learned not to look at familiar faces anymore. They never looked back. "How dare you!" The voice cut through the street noise like a blade. Clara's steps faltered. She knew that voice. Had known it since birth. "How dare you show your face where decent people conduct their business?" Lady Margaret Ashford stood before the entrance to Harrisworth and Cummack, the most fashionable milliner in London. Beside her, wrapped in furs Clara could no longer afford, stood Louisa, Clara's younger sister, the bride whose wedding had destroyed everything. Clara's throat tightened, but she kept her expression smooth. She had practiced this. The art of feeling nothing while your heart shattered again and again. "Forgive me, your ladyship," she said quietly, using the formal address. Her mother was a stranger now. The title made it official. A small crowd had begun to gather. Clara recognized some faces. Lady Pemberton's daughter, who had once called her friend. Mrs. Ashworth, who had hosted Clara at her country estate just last summer. Now they whispered behind gloved hands, eyes bright with the pleasure of witnessing someone else's humiliation. "You are a disgrace to the Ashford name," Lady Margaret continued, her voice carrying across the street. "Your father was right to disown you. I only regret we did not do so sooner." Louisa stood silent, her eyes fixed on the cobblestones. Not a word in Clara's defence, not even a glance of sympathy. The same sister who had sobbed in Clara's arms the night before her wedding, terrified and uncertain. The same sister whose betrothed had cornered Clara in the library, attempting liberties Clara had firmly refused. The same sister who, when scandal erupted, had chosen silence over truth. "I shall trouble you no further," Clara said. She dipped into a perfect curtsy, the manners beaten into her since childhood still intact, even if everything else had crumbled. Then she turned and walked away. She did not run. She did not cry. She simply walked, one foot in front of the other, while the murmurs followed her down the street like ghosts. Her hands were shaking by the time she reached Cheapside. The neighbourhood was rougher here, the streets narrower. Clara had learned to navigate London's less fashionable districts over the past months. Mrs. Winters demanded medicines and tonics, but refused to pay fair prices, sending Clara to apothecaries where quality was questionable but costs were low. The shop Clara needed was tucked between a gin house and a pawnbroker. She kept her eyes down and moved quickly. Women of her class did not walk alone in such places. But then she was no longer of any class at all. Well, what do we have here? 3 men blocked her path. Their breath reeked of cheap alcohol, their clothes stained and torn. The tallest one grinned, revealing missing teeth. "A lady," he said mockingly. "All alone. How very unfortunate." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She tried to step around them, but they moved with her, forming a loose circle. "I have business to conduct," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Please let me pass." "Business?" The second man laughed. "Hear that? The fallen lady has business." The third man reached for her arm. Clara jerked back, but there was nowhere to go. The wall pressed against her spine. "The lady is under my protection." The voice was cold, sharp with authority. "Leave, now." The men froze. Clara's eyes found the speaker. He stood beside a gleaming black carriage, his posture relaxed, but his gaze lethal. Tall, dark-haired, perhaps 30 years of age. His clothes marked him as nobility, the cut of his coat alone worth more than everything Clara currently owned. But it was his eyes that made the men step back. Grey, intelligent, and utterly unafraid. "We meant no harm, your lordship," the tall man stammered, suddenly very interested in his own feat. "Then you will have no difficulty leaving." They scattered like rats before a cat. Clara pressed harder against the wall, humiliation burning in her chest. Saved twice in one day, pitied by strangers. It was unbearable. "I require no charity, sir," she said stiffly. The gentleman studied her for a long moment. His gaze was neither leering nor dismissive, but something else entirely. Curious, perhaps, or simply careful. "Nevertheless," he said quietly, "I would rest easier knowing you reached your destination safely. May I offer you my carriage?" "I cannot accept—" "You can, and I believe you should." He gestured to the driver. "Where may we take you?" Clara wanted to refuse. Pride demanded it, but exhaustion won. She was so very tired of fighting. "Belgrave Square," she whispered. "Number 14. He handed her into the carriage himself, his grip firm but brief. Then he settled across from her, maintaining a respectful distance. They rode in silence. Clara stared out the window, watching London blur past. She was acutely aware of his presence, of the way he did not demand explanation or conversation. He simply sat, occasionally glancing at her, his expression unreadable. When the carriage stopped before Mrs. Winter's townhouse, he descended first and offered his hand. "Thank you," Clara said, meeting his eyes for the first time. Grey, she had thought. But up close they held flecks of blue, like storm clouds breaking. "Edmund Blackwell," he said. "Earl of Thornwood." The name meant nothing to her beyond its rank. She curtsied. "Miss Ashford." She thought she saw something flicker in his expression. Recognition? Pity? But he merely bowed and returned to his carriage. Clara watched it disappear around the corner, then climbed the steps to face Mrs. Winter's inevitable wrath at her tardiness. That evening, as Clara helped the widow prepare for bed, Mrs. Winters thrust a letter at her. "My aunt," she announced, "has taken ill at Thornwood Hall. Not gravely, but she requires attendance. You will go tomorrow and serve as her companion until she recovers." Clara's fingers tightened on the letter. "Thornwood Hall, madam." "In Hampshire. The estate borders the Earl of Thornwood's lands. Dreadfully isolated, but Lady Pemberton refuses to come to London." Mrs. Winters waved her hand dismissively. "Pack your things. The coach leaves at dawn." Clara retreated to her tiny attic room, the letter still clutched in her hand. Thornwood. The Earl of Thornwood. What cruel fate kept throwing her into his path? She pressed her forehead against the cold window glass and wondered if it was possible to die of humiliation before morning came. Thornwood Hall rose from the Hampshire countryside like something from a fairy tale, all grey stone and climbing ivy. Clara had arrived 3 days ago, and Lady Pemberton proved to be recovering from nothing more serious than a persistent cold and an even more persistent desire for company. The old woman was kind, at least. Kinder than Mrs. Winters, kinder than Clara's own family. She asked no prying questions about Clara's circumstances, merely accepted her presence and chatted amiably about estate gossip and the weather. But the estate itself felt haunted, too large, too quiet. And somewhere within it the Earl of Thornwood resided. Clara had not seen him since her arrival. She told herself she was relieved. On her 3rd night, sleep proved impossible. Clara had grown accustomed to insomnia, to the way her mind replayed every moment of her downfall whenever darkness fell. Tonight was worse than usual. The confrontation with her mother kept recurring, sharp and relentless. At 2 in the morning, She abandoned her bed and slipped downstairs. Lady Pemberton had mentioned the library with particular fondness. Perhaps a book would quiet her thoughts. The library was magnificent. 3 stories of books, accessible by a spiral staircase, with tall windows that would flood the space with light during the day. Now, lit only by moonlight and a dying fire, it felt almost sacred. Clara was reaching for a volume of poetry when a voice spoke from the shadows. "I find I am not the only one who cannot sleep in this house." She spun, hand flying to her throat. The Earl of Thornwood sat in a leather chair near the fireplace, a book resting forgotten in his lap. He looked different here. Tired, perhaps. More human. "Forgive me, your lordship." Clara stammered. "I did not mean to intrude." "You are not intruding." He gestured to the shelves around them. These books were meant to be read, not merely displayed. "Please stay." Clara hesitated, torn between propriety and the strange pull of his presence. He made no move to rise, no attempt to come closer. He simply watched her with those grey-blue eyes. "I find I dislike sleeping in empty houses," he said quietly. "They are too full of ghosts." Something in his voice resonated with the ache in her chest. Clara found herself moving toward the fire, toward the chair opposite his. She sat carefully, hands folded in her lap. "What are you reading?" she asked. He glanced at the book as if surprised to find it there. "Milton. Paradise Lost. I cannot recommend it for improving one's mood." Despite everything, Clara felt her lips curve slightly. "No, I imagine not. And you, what were you seeking?" "Wordsworth. Something about nature and beauty. Something that does not require thinking." Edmund. She found herself thinking of him as Edmund now, though she would never dare use his Christian name aloud. Leaned back in his chair. "Lady Pemberton mentioned you are companion to Mrs. Winters." "Yes. A demanding position, I imagine." "It provides employment." Clara kept her voice even. "I am grateful for it." "Are you?" The question was too direct, too knowing. Clara met his gaze and saw something there that made her breath catch. Understanding. "Society rejected you?" he said, and there was no pity in his voice, only curiosity. "What did you do to deserve such theatre?" Clara should have lied, should have deflected. Instead, she heard herself say, "Nothing. But guilt is no longer required for condemnation, only rumour." Edmund studied her for a long moment. "I believe you." Those 3 words, simple, devastating. Clara blinked against the sudden burn of tears. "Why?" she whispered. "Because I have learned to recognize truth when I hear it, and because—" He paused, seeming to weigh his words. "Because I, too, have been rejected. I understand what it tastes like." The fire crackled between them. Clara knew she should leave, should flee this dangerous intimacy. But she could not move. "What happened to you?" she asked. Edmund's jaw tightened. 5 years ago I was engaged to be married. The banns had been read, the church prepared. I stood at the altar and waited. His voice went flat. She never came. She had eloped the night before with a wealthier man. A duke, to be precise. Apparently an earl was insufficient. "I am sorry." "Are you?" Most people found it rather entertaining. The jilted earl. Society dined on that story for months. Clara thought of her own humiliation, of the whispers that followed her everywhere. "Yes," she said softly. "I imagine they did." They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire die to embers. When Edmund finally spoke again, his voice was gentler. "You are welcome in this library, any time, even at 2 a.m. "Thank you, my lord." "Edmund." He caught her gaze. "When it is only us, call. Me, Edmund. Clara knew she should refuse, but the loneliness in his eyes matched the loneliness in her heart. Then you must call me Clara. He smiled. It transformed his face, made him young again. Clara. She left before she could do something foolish, like stay all night. But as she climbed the stairs to her room, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Hope. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange, suspended reality. Clara attended Lady Pemberton during the day, reading to her, playing cards, managing correspondence. But at night she returned to the library. Edmund was always there. They talked about everything and nothing. Books and music, childhood memories carefully edited to avoid painful truths. He told her about managing his estates, the responsibilities he had inherited too young. She told him about her love of painting, a hobby abandoned when she could no longer afford supplies. They did not discuss the future. They existed only in those stolen hours, in the firelight and the silence of a house that held too many ghosts for both of them. Then came the storm. It struck on a Tuesday night, violent and sudden. Rain lashed against the windows. Thunder shook the foundations. Clara tried to read in her room, but gave up, seeking the familiar comfort of the library. Edmund was not there. She waited, feeling foolish. He had no obligation to meet her. Perhaps he had grown bored with their conversations. Perhaps... A sound stopped her thoughts, soft, barely audible over the storm. Someone crying. She found herself moving toward it, down a corridor she had never explored. The sound came from a small sitting room, door slightly ajar. Clara should not have entered, should not have intruded on private grief. But the sobs were so raw, so broken, that she could not help herself. Edmund sat on the floor before the fire, head in his hands, shoulders shaking. He did not hear her approach. "Edmund?" she whispered. He looked up. His face was wet, eyes red. He had never looked more human. "Clara." He tried to compose himself, to rebuild the walls. "You should not. Neither should you." She crossed the room and knelt beside him. "Not alone." "I am pathetic," he said bitterly. "A grown man, crying like a child because a storm reminds me of the night she left. 5 years, Clara. 5 years, and I still—" He broke off, shame flooding his expression. Clara reached out and took his hand. He stared at their joined fingers, as if they were something miraculous. "Tell me," she said softly. So he did. He told her about the woman he had loved, the future he had imagined, about standing in the church, watching guests whisper and leave, about his father's disappointment, his mother's tears, about learning, in the cruelest way possible, that love was a lie and trust was for fools. "I swore I would never let anyone close again," he finished, voice raw. "Never let anyone have that power over me." Clara understood. She understood too well. "After my family. Cast me out," she heard herself say. "I thought I would die. I wanted to die. Because if the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally could abandon me so easily, then what was the point? What was I worth?" Edmund's hand tightened on hers. "My sister's betrothed cornered me in our library one evening." Clara continued, the words spilling out like poison finally drawn from a wound. "He tried to kiss me, to force himself on me. I pushed him away, threatened to scream. He left, angry and humiliated." She took a shaking breath. "The next morning, he told my sister I had seduced him, that I had pursued him, that I was jealous of her happiness. Louisa was devastated. She went to our parents. I thought—" Clara's voice cracked. "I thought they would believe me. I thought blood meant something." But they chose reputation over truth. Edmund finished quietly. "They chose ease over love. It was simpler to cast me out than to confront him, to risk the scandal of a broken engagement. So they did. They publicly disowned me, called me a liar and worse. And Louisa. Clara closed her eyes. Louisa said nothing. She married him 3 weeks later. They were supposed to love you, Edmund said fiercely. They knew you were innocent, and they still chose their reputation over you. Yes. The admission broke something inside her. Clara felt tears spill over, hot and unstoppable. I hate that I still love them. I hate that part of me wants them back, wants them to realize their mistake and come for me. How pathetic is that? Edmund pulled her closer, wrapped his arms around her. Clara buried her face in his shoulder and finally allowed herself to break. He held her through it all, his own tears mixing with hers. I know what betrayal tastes like, Clara. He whispered against her hair. It is bitter beyond measure, and you did not deserve it. You deserved better. You deserve everything. They stayed like that until the storm passed, 2 broken people holding each other together. When Clara finally pulled back, Edmund cupped her face in his hands. His thumbs brushed away her tears with infinite gentleness. You are extraordinary, he said. Do you know that? You have every reason to be bitter, to be cruel, but you are kind. You are still capable of hope. So are you, Clara whispered. His gaze dropped to her lips. The air between them changed, became charged. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She should move away. She should. Edmund leaned closer. Then he froze. His hands fell away. He stood abruptly, turning his back to her. Forgive me, he said roughly. I should not have. This was inappropriate. I apologize. Clara rose slowly, her legs unsteady. There is nothing to forgive, my lord. The formal address hung between them like a door slamming shut. Edmund flinched. I should retire. Clara continued, proud that her voice did not shake. Good night. She left before he could respond, before she could do something foolish like beg him not to push her away. But as she climbed the stairs, she knew. Something had shifted between them, something irreversible. And they were both terrified. The following days were torture. Edmund avoided her completely. No more library visits, no chance encounters in the hallways. He had retreated behind his walls, and Clara understood why. She had retreated behind her own. They had revealed too much, become too vulnerable, and vulnerability, they had both learned, was dangerous. Lady Pemberton recovered quickly, her cold nothing more than a memory. On the 5th morning after the storm, Mrs. Winter's carriage arrived. My aunt no longer requires your services, came the message. You are to return to London immediately. Clara packed her meagre belongings with mechanical precision. This was for the best. She had been foolish to imagine anything else. That evening, Lady Pemberton insisted Clara join her for a farewell dinner. To Clara's shock, Edmund appeared. He had clearly not expected her presence either. Their eyes met across the table, and Clara felt the impact like a physical blow. The meal was agony. They made polite conversation, discussing nothing of importance while the real conversation raged in every glance, every careful word. After dinner, Clara excused herself to finish preparations. She was walking down the corridor to her room when Edmund's voice stopped her. Clara, wait. She turned. He stood several feet away, hands clenched at his sides. Must you leave? He asked. I am not mistress of my own life, your lordship. I go where I am sent. What if you could choose? The question was raw. What would you choose? Clara's throat tightened. She could lie. Should lie. But she had already lost everything else. She might as well lose her pride, too. I would choose to stay, she whispered. But you and I both know what staying would mean. Edmund closed the distance between them in 3 strides. Society be damned. Easy words for an earl. Clara stepped back. You would survive the scandal. You are wealthy, titled, male. People would gossip for a season and then forget. But I? She laughed bitterly. I would be ruined, again, completely. I would have nothing left, not even the scrap of employment that keeps me fed. You believe I would ruin you? I believe you are terrified of trusting anyone again. Clara said, I do not blame you for it. God knows I understand. But I will not be the woman who teaches you that fear was justified. I will not be another betrayal in your collection. The words landed like blows. Edmund's face went white. You think so little of me? I think you are human. I think you are scared. And I think... Her voice broke. I think I care for you too much to let you make a decision you will regret. Clara, goodbye, Lord Thornwood. She forced herself to walk away. This time, Edmund did not follow. Clara left Thornwood Hall at dawn. She did not look back at the estate, did not allow herself to wonder if he watched from a window. She had done the right thing, the smart thing. So why did it feel like dying? 3 weeks later, London felt like a prison. Clara moved through her days mechanically, attending Mrs. Winters with numb efficiency. She did not think about Thornwood Hall, did not think about grey-blue eyes and a voice that said her name like a prayer. She thought about these things constantly. Mrs. Winters was in a foul mood that morning, criticizing everything from Clara's posture to the way she poured tea. Clara endured it silently. What was one more cruelty in a life built on them? The invitation arrived at noon. Mrs. Winters opened it, then read it again. Her expression shifted from surprise to calculation. How extraordinary, she murmured. The Earl of Thornwood is hosting a ball at Thornwood Hall this Saturday evening. He never hosts balls, never. I wonder what has prompted this sudden sociability. Clara's heart stopped. He has included you in the invitation. Mrs. Winters continued, eyes sharp. How curious. You will accompany me naturally. Not as a guest, but you may attend in a servile capacity. Wear your grey dress. I will not have you embarrassing me. Clara wanted to refuse, wanted to claim illness, to hide, to be anywhere but there. But Mrs. Winters would not allow it, and some treacherous part of her, some foolish, hopeful part, wanted to see him again, even if it destroyed her. Saturday arrived with cruel swiftness. The journey to Thornwood Hall felt eternal and too short all at once. Clara's hands would not stop shaking. The ballroom blazed with candlelight, filled with the cream of county society. Clara recognized several faces from her former life. They did not recognize her, or pretended not to. She was furniture now, background noise in her simple grey dress. Mrs. Winters dismissed her to wait in the corridor. Clara was relieved. She could not bear to watch Edmund dance with eligible young ladies, to see him smile at women who had everything Clara had lost. But she could hear the music, could hear the laughter and conversation, could picture it all too clearly. She was contemplating escape when the music stopped. Silence fell over the ballroom, so complete that Clara heard her own heart beat. Then came footsteps on marble. The ballroom doors opened. Edmund stood framed in the entrance, scanning the corridor. His eyes found her. Miss Ashford, he said clearly. May I have a word? Every head in the ballroom had turned. Clara could feel their stares, could hear the whispers beginning. She shook her head frantically. My lord, I cannot... Edmund walked toward her. Not rushed, but inexorable. He stopped directly before her and extended his hand. Dance with me. Your lordship, you cannot... I can. His voice carried back into the ballroom, loud enough for everyone to hear. And I will. Clara stared at his outstretched hand. Taking it would mean catastrophe. Every person in that ballroom knew who she was, knew her scandal. Edmund would be mocked, pitied, she would be crucified. But his eyes held hers, steady, sure, unafraid. "Trust me," he whispered. "Please." Clara placed her hand in his. The gasps were audible as Edmund led her into the ballroom. He pulled her into waltz position, one hand on her waist, the other holding hers. The orchestra, after a moment of shocked hesitation, began to play. They danced alone in the center of the floor. Every eye watched, every mouth whispered. Clara felt exposed, terrified, certain this was another humiliation waiting to unfold. But Edmund held her like she was precious, like she was everything. In the middle of the dance, he stopped. "I asked you all here tonight under false pretenses," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. The music died. Clara's heart hammered so hard she thought it might escape her chest. "I said this was a ball. It is not. It is a declaration." Edmund's hand tightened on hers. He looked out at the assembled crowd with something like contempt. Miss Clara Ashford was rejected by her family for a crime she did not commit. She was cast out by a society that values reputation over truth, appearance over character, and in doing so, that society revealed its own corruption, not hers. Murmurs erupted. Clara tried to pull away, but Edmund held fast. "For 5 years," he continued, his voice softening. "I believed love was weakness, that trust was foolishness, that allowing anyone close would only lead to pain." He looked at Clara now, his eyes holding hers. "And then I met a woman who had every reason to become bitter, yet remained kind, who lost everything, yet kept her dignity, who was betrayed by those who should have loved her, yet still possessed the courage to hope." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. She could not stop them. "You taught me that courage is not the absence of fear," Edmund said, his voice rough with emotion. "It is choosing love despite it. It is trusting again after trust has been shattered. It is believing in goodness when the world has shown you only cruelty." He released her hand. Then, in front of everyone, he knelt. The gasps became exclamations. Ladies fanned themselves, gentlemen exchanged shocked glances. Mrs. Winters looked on the verge of apoplexy. "Miss Ashford. Clara." Edmund's voice shook. "I am asking you, in front of everyone who matters and many who do not, to be my wife. Not despite your scandal, but because your strength in facing it showed me what true nobility looks like. Marry me, please." Clara could barely see him through her tears. "I have nothing to offer you but a ruined name. And I have nothing to offer you but a broken heart learning to beat again." Edmund smiled, and it was beautiful. "Marry me, and we shall be perfectly imperfect together. Marry me, and I will spend every day of my life ensuring you never doubt your worth again. Marry me because I love you. God help me. I love you so much it terrifies me. But I would rather live one day loving you than a lifetime afraid." Clara could not speak, could not breathe, could only nod, over and over, while sobs tore from her throat. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Edmund surged to his feet and kissed her. Thoroughly, publicly, scandalously. Clara kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into it. Every ounce of pain, of hope, of desperate love. When they finally broke apart, the ballroom erupted. To Clara's shock, the sound was applause. It started with Mrs. Winters, of all people. The widow was crying, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief as she clapped loudly. Others joined in. Not everyone, certainly. Clara saw several scandalized faces, several people whispering behind their hands. But enough to matter. Edmund pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. "I have you," he whispered. "I finally have you." "We have each other," Clara corrected, and felt joy bloom in her chest like spring after endless winter. The ball continued around them, but Clara was aware only of Edmund. His hand in hers, his warmth beside her, his steady presence anchoring her to this impossible reality. Hours later, after the guests had departed and the candles burned low, Edmund led Clara to the terrace. The night was clear, stars scattered across the black sky like diamonds. He wrapped his coat around her shoulders. Clara leaned into him, breathing in the scent of him, hardly daring to believe this was real. "They will say you married beneath yourself," she said quietly. Edmund turned her to face him. "Let them. I married the only woman brave enough to teach an earl that love is not surrender. It is victory." Clara rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I spent so long believing I was unlovable. Then I shall spend the rest of our lives proving you magnificently wrong." Edmund kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Clara Ashford, soon to be Clara Blackwell. I love your strength and your kindness. I love your stubborn dignity and your impossible hope. I love everything you are and everything you will become." "I love you too," Clara whispered. "So much it frightens me." "Then we shall be frightened together, and brave together, and happy together." He lifted her chin, his eyes soft in the starlight. "What happens now?" Clara smiled, truly smiled, for the first time in months. "Now? Now we live, loudly, unapologetically, together." "Together," Edmund agreed, and kissed her again. And for the first time since her world had shattered, Clara Ashford believed in happy endings again. More than that, she was living one. The stars bore witness. The night held them gently. And in that moment, standing on the terrace of Thornwood Hall with the man who had chosen her when the world cast her aside, Clara understood something fundamental. She had not needed society's approval to have worth. She had not needed her family's love to be lovable. She had always been enough, exactly as she was. It had just taken finding someone brave enough to see it, and to help her see it too.